Naumi chit pratibham devim param bhairava yoginim matarmana prameyam sha shula bhuja kritaspadam. Om, I salute that goddess who is the flash of insight, whereby awareness becomes aware of itself. She is that transcendent deity Parā, who is inseparable from Bhairava. In each and every moment she manifests as the trinity of knower, knowing and known. Om, I meditate upon that goddess who abides in the lotus heart, mounted atop the trident of the three nadis. Om Panchashalipi Vibhakta Mukadopan Madhya Vakshastalam Bhasvan Maulini Baddha Chandashakalam Apinatunstanim Mudram Akshagunam Shudadya Kalasham Vidyam Chastam Vijay Bibranam Vishada Prabham Trinayanam Vagdevatam Ashraye. I take refuge in that goddess of speech, Vak Devi. Her body is pervaded by the 50 distinct alphabets of the Sanskrit language. She is eternally 16 and very comely. She is clear light. She is the light of consciousness and three-eyed. She holds in one hand a rosary, in the other hand a book. With one other hand she holds a pot of nectar, and with the other hand she shows the mudra of knowledge. I take refuge in Vak Devi. Om Yathagner Dahika Shakti Rama Krishna Sthita Hiya Sarva Vidya Swarupam Tam Saradam Pranamamyaham Saradam Pranamamyaham. Om, I bow to Sarada Devi, who is inseparable from reality the way heat is inseparable from a fire. She is the embodiment of all wisdom, the incarnation of all the Mahavidyas, Kali, Tara, Shodashi, Bhuvaneshwari, Bhairavi, Chinnamastaka, Duhavati, Bagalamukhi, Matangi, Kamala and others. May this be an offering at her lotus feet, she who is Sarada, the goddess of speech, she who is embodied as Bagalā. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om. Jai. So tonight I want to ask a rather subtle philosophical question. I think a very important and meaningful question actually. Is there such a thing as silence? Like, speaking in the abstract, is there such a thing as silence? And can one experience pure, undiluted, undifferentiated silence? And you know, there are many spiritual traditions that assert silence as the highest reality. So all the sound, all the words, all the language, they only obtain on lower levels of reality, which are usually called void or illusion. And at a certain point, you have to go beyond all language. Yes, you've heard this kind of rhetoric, that you have to go beyond the mind, you have to go beyond all language. That's true, but just because you have to go beyond all mind, does that automatically imply that you have to go beyond all language? You see, in spiritual traditions that are silence-oriented, usually what you'll find is that language is conflated with time, which is conflated with the mind, which is conflated with illusion or void or unreality. So these kinds of philosophies usually present the world as unreal or void-like or somewhat degenerate or lower, and then they present the spiritual transcendent realm as being exalted and better, and it's silent. It's silent and still. So that's good. That's great. There are a lot of spiritual traditions that are oriented towards silence and stillness, and those are wonderful and very beautiful traditions. However, I think there's a very special feature when it comes to tantric non-duality, because the ultimate nature of reality in this philosophy is not silent. In fact, it could never be silent, actually. And to discuss that, I want to introduce the concept of Parā-Vāc. So para means transcendent, vak means speech. So the claim here is that even on the highest level of reality, which you might call paramartha sat in Sanskrit, at the absolute level, there is still a kind of speech. Like the absolute is never devoid of speech. It's never devoid of language. In other words, it's never devoid of a dynamic resonance, if you will. Never will you have silence without sound. Never will you have stillness without movement. That's, I think, the special feature of tantric non-duality, where you still have speech actually maintained at the highest level of reality. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Parā-Vāc. And of course, this is a goddess. Parā-Vāc is synonymous with Shakti, synonymous with Kali. And she's always there. So I'll make a comparison tonight between silence-only types of schools. And I'll compare it to tantric non-duality, where we have, even at the highest level of reality, at the Paramartha Sat level, we have this Parā-Vāc. Of course, when we talk about Parā-Vāc, necessarily we're going to have to discuss the other kinds of Vāc, the other kinds of speech. Vāc means speech. Vāc means word. So the other kinds of speech or the other kinds of word that we can have are as follows. We can have language like this, where I'm speaking to you, I'm saying words and meanings are being conveyed. This is called Vaikari. Vaikari is the spoken word, and it's considered to be the most dualistic of all the words, because it's the most, arguably it's the most time-bound, it's the most discursive, it's the one that delimits most. Hence it's called Vaikari. Then there's another type of speech which happens prior to spoken word, and it's usually the engine of spoken word, if you will. It's called Madhyama. Madhyama means the middle or the middling. So Madhyama refers to thoughts, what some people call mentalies. It's a language mostly consisting of words, but it's also images, so the mind doesn't just think in words, it also thinks in images. So this kind of like word hyphen image kind of thing that happens in the mind, that's a kind of speech as well. And then there's a third kind of speech, and this is a very mystical and difficult to understand kind of speech. It goes beyond the words, it goes beyond the mind, so it's beyond all word and beyond all thought. And yet it too is a kind of speech. This is called the Pashanti. Pashanti has the connotation of visionary speech, and it's on this level that bija mantras and many mantras work. So it's beyond spoken word, it's beyond cognized thought, and yet it too is a kind of speech. So we'll talk a little bit about Pashanti, which is a very beautiful and very transcendent reality. And then beyond all these three, in a sense beyond, but also in another sense imminent, in all three, is this Parā-Vāc, the supreme speech, which is always there at the highest level of reality, which inheres on every level of reality. This speech is called Shakti, whose various expressions are Vaikari, Madhyama, Pashanti. So this Shakti, this Parā-Vāc, is never gone, it's never sublated, it's never dispensed with. So therefore, you can't really have complete silence. That would be like having Shiva without Shakti, So you can see why this question is kind of interesting. If we ask this question, is there such a thing as silence? It allows us to do this really exciting comparison between silence-only schools, like you have in certain forms of Buddhism and certain forms of Advaita Vedanta, and you have schools where it's silence plus a dynamic resonance. It's Shiva plus Shakti. And since tantric non-duality is very Shakti-oriented, necessarily we tend to emphasize language and beauty and visualization and all of these things. They're not seen as antithetical to spirituality, but rather ornamental to it, if you will. If you can even use that word. Okay, so that's where I want to go tonight. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to talk about Mā Bagalā, whose Jayanti it was yesterday. So yesterday we had our Bagalāmukhī Homa at the Kali Mandir. And we were talking about Mā Bagalā a lot, reflecting upon this very mysterious form of the Divine Mother. She's one of the 10 Mahavidyas. So in the series of forms of the Divine Mother, she is one of the 10. Or the list of 10 can change from region to region. Durga is sometimes included in that list. But generally the list is as follows. Kali, she is the primeval Mahavidya, if you will. She is the archetype for all the Mahavidyas. But she is herself one of the 10. So she's one form of Kali. Then we have Tara, who is very much like Kali. So we have Kali, Tara, Shodashi, otherwise known as Tripura Sundari. Then we have Bhuvaneshwari, a somewhat mysterious form. She's the emphasis in the Devi Bhagavatam. Her name there is Bhuvaneshwari. Bhairavi. Bhairavi or Tripura Bhairavi is somewhat related to Tripura Sundari. So we have Bhairavi. And then we have Chinnamastaka, whose Jayanti is next week actually. So coming up is Chinnamasta Jayanti. So we have Chinnamastaka, and then we have Dhumavati. And then we have Bagalā, whose Jayanti was just yesterday. So Bagalāmukhī, and then Matangi, and Matangi's Jayanti just passed. Matangi's Jayanti was on Akshaya Tritiya last week. And then we have Kamalatmika. So these are the Kamalatmika is also known as Lakshmi. So these are like the basic 10. And as you can see, Bagalā is one of the 10. And in a sense, you can consider her the goddess of silence. Because what she does is she stuns the enemy into silence. She wields a club, and in a few moments we'll see her dhyana mantra, and you'll see she catches the enemy's tongue. Jivam Kilaya. She nails down the tongue, if you will. So she prevents the enemy from speaking. And then she has this club, and sometimes it's a kind of magical stick. A danda, which is associated to exorcising ghosts and breaking black magic spells. And so she takes that stick, which is a very popular stick in the sadhu world used for exorcising spirits, and with that stick, she bops the enemy on the head. So usually Mā Bagalā has the connotation of black magic. People tend to go to her when they're trying to win a law case, or when they're trying to silence their enemies, or when they're trying to get over when they're trying to prevent gossip or slander being said against them. So she has a somewhat bad reputation from time to time because she's seen as the deity that is invoked when people want to do some not so respectable acts. So she's the source of a lot of black magic, and so when you have a court case or something like that, chances are you're going to be doing some kind of Bagalā sadhana. So like the Bagalā temples in India, they are concerningly full of people. Oh my god, why is there such a long line outside the Bagalā temple? It's like, oh, people have some problems. There's some court cases. So she's quite... what's that, Colleen?
I said, I would be too afraid. No way. No way would I dabble in that whatsoever. But I always think to myself that if the goddess is truly like watching what I'm doing, that she would be ahead of me doing it for me.
Yeah.
I would have asked.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, that's like a different paradigm of bhakti. That's when we have bhakti, right? So we say like, there are two ways to approach Ma. Either as Ma, or me. And so for many of us, God is, it's like, what can God do for me? You know, the more mature bhaktas are like, well, what can I do for God? Or ultimately I and that are one. But you could say there are many people who treat religion as a kind of transaction. And so when you want a specific thing, you go to the specific form of God that is meant for that specific thing. And Bagalā has the connotation of like the silencer. And she's got that stick and she clubs and stuns and paralyzes. Her Shakti is called the Stambhana Shakti, the paralyzing power. You know, so she paralyzes. And she silences. She paralyzes, she stuns, she silences. So she's the goddess, if you will. She's the goddess of silence.
Can that be reversed onto you? Like if she wants you to be quiet, can she turn that back on you?
Yes, and I think, Colleen, that's the way that we tend to approach it. And that's what Swami Bhajananandaji was pointing out yesterday during the Bagalā Homa as well. The reason I want to talk about Bagalā is because she's particularly important for our lineage, actually. Because Sarada Devi has a special connection to Bagalā. And Sarada Devi, of course, is our mantra Shakti. She is the energy that flows through our lineage. And so Bagalā is somewhat reclaimed in the highest spiritual sense when we apply exactly that view, Colleen. It's like the idea that, like, well, in one sense, that can be directed outwards. This stunning, this paralyzing, this immobilizing, this silencing can be directed outwards towards our enemies. As if our enemies, our shatru, are physical individuals, like things in the world. But then a slightly more nuanced understanding or a subtle understanding is like, no, there are enemies, but they are all in my mind. Like there's no one out there who's actually causing me any problems. In fact, Sumeruji and I were translating some old Kamakya tantras the other day, and we came across a curse in one of the tantras. And it was worded so interestingly. There are some mantras for enacting the curse, and the curse was like, may you get sick and die and be angry about it. So there was like a clause. It's like, it's not enough that you get sick. It's not enough that you die. You have to actually not like that it's happening. So that's kind of a funny curse. It's like, because there's some people, they're yogis, you know, whatever happens to them, it's okay. They have inner fortitude. So the curse is specifically targeted at ruining mental stability so that you actually suffer the curse. Anyway, the world of Tantra, it's full of curses and things like that. It's a very macabre world sometimes, especially when it comes to these Shakta, goddess kind of oriented Tantras. In any case, this is a subtle understanding, as Kolinji is pointing out here. It's like, well, there are obstacles in the world around me, but importantly, the Shatrukshaya, the killing of my enemies, really only needs to happen within. It's like, oh, Arjuna, or is it, oh, Karen, have you tried to speak to the manager within? It's kind of like, it's like Kurukshetra. It's Dharma Kshetra, the battle of what Arjuna is about to fight. It happens internally. The Bhagavad Gita can be understood entirely as a metaphor, and you're going to war against one's own subversive faculties that are interrupting one's own spiritual life. So you could use that energy that is invoked when we worship Mā Bagalā, instead of directing it outwards, as many people tend to do, on a subtler, more mature understanding, you can direct it inwards and use it to stun, immobilize, and paralyze all the spiritual obstacles that arise in the mind. And then, arguably, an even subtler understanding. So it's like level 3. Level 1 is, hey, Mā Bagalā stuns, immobilizes, and paralyzes. Let's invoke her to harm all of our enemies out there. That's like that's one understanding. Okay, I'm not gonna say it's wrong. It's one understanding and it's part of her tradition. But I would say another understanding, which here I'm calling subtler for better or for worse. But another understanding is, as we just talked about, like direct her at the enemies within. But I think an even subtler understanding is this, and this is the approach that we tend to take. And the approach is as follows. And by the way, Ganapati Muni was one of the people who expressed this about Mā Bagalā first, I think. So we have to credit him with this sentiment. He said, Mā Bagalā stuns, paralyzes, and immobilizes. But what that means really is when the mind is completely stunned when it comes face to face with the beauty of the Divine Mother. Nobody can look upon beauty like that and not be stunned, fixed in place, silenced, awed. So when we pray to Mā Bagalā, we're saying, Ma, catch my tongue. Stop all my incessant speech, which projects a world of falsehood, which makes me think about myself and about the world harmful things. Catch my tongue and prevent me from speaking myself into complicated problems. So you're begging her to catch your tongue, and then you're saying, and now take your stick, Ma, and bop me on the head. In other words, stun me in place so I can hold my yogic posture and annihilate my mind, buddhim nashaya, so I can be plunged into samadhi. That samadhi is the absolute silence, the absolute stillness. So when we pray to Mā Bagalā, we're asking her to catch our tongue, to destroy our mind, and to stun us, to immobilize us with her beauty, to silence us with her splendor. So that, arguably, that's the deep and beautiful understanding of Mā Bagalā. And that's the approach that we tend to take, a more devotional approach, an approach rooted in devotion, you could say. It's a devotional approach. And less of a magical approach, you could say, and more of a devotional approach. Yeah.
Thank you. I know I'm in the right spot. Oh my God.
Yes, good. So that's Mā Bagalā for you. And I'll tell you a little story in just a bit as to why Mā Bagalā is associated to Mā Sarada. But it should be mentioned that the world of Bagalā and the world of the Mahavidyas, especially Bagalā, is a magical world. And this can be kind of like a dicey world, because this is a world of practitioners who, I guess you could say, are more on the magical side. But you can see from a philosophical bhakti point of view, the question we have to ask then is about silence. Because if Mā Bagalā stuns us with her beauty, if she silences us with her splendor, if she plunges the mind into samadhi, what is the nature of that samadhi? Is it really silence? Is it really stillness? The argument I'm going to make in this talk is that it's not. Even within silence, there's a divine speech, a divine resonance, which is called Parā-Vāc. Even in stillness, there's a dynamism, which we're calling Shakti. So I'm going to, in a few moments, make a comparison between Advaita Vedanta and non-dual Tantra. And you'll see in Advaita Vedanta, it's a doctrine of silence. It's a doctrine of stillness. And many, many spiritual traditions in the world are like that. They like silence, and that's wonderful, not to knock it, that's true also. But then on the tantric non-dual side, speech and movement are all glorified, and even in the most still, the most silent, even there is some spanda, as Sethji is saying. So that's the argument I'm going to make. So tonight's talk is going to be about Mā Bagalā, and if there really is such a thing as silence. Anyway, I'm just thinking out loud. I'm not really sure where the lecture is going to go, but I think this is the direction I generally mean to take it. As you know, many of us are getting back from Atlanta, and then after our week-long Atlanta retreat, we had our Laguna Beach retreat at the Kali Mandir. It was a beautiful retreat, and we just wrapped up yesterday. So I know that many of us, the body is currently convalescing. It's a beautiful word, convalescing. I like that word. So the body is convalescing. And so I thought we could talk a little bit also about keeping up spiritual momentum, especially after a big retreat. The festivity and the joy of coming together in God, sometimes there can be a little bit of a come down after that. So many people have been writing in and telling me that, after Atlanta or after the Kali Mandir retreat, it's like there's a kind of reaction or sort of inertia that sets in, a sadness almost. It's okay to be sad, because sad means secretly a dinosaur. I saw that on the internet. I thought it was cute. Secretly a dinosaur. But let's talk a little bit about, if there's time, after we have this Bagalāmukhī conversation, we can talk a little bit about the nature of spiritual practice. Yeah, like that. And how to keep up the momentum after such a spiritually, charged time like that. So sometimes Navaratri, the whole 9 nights of Durga, is a lot of intense spiritual practice. At the end of that, there can be a bit of a reaction. And so we can kind of revert to tamasic patterns that we haven't been doing in a very long time. And it's kind of disturbing because we just spend 9 days absorbed in intense spiritual effort over the whole of Navaratri, and suddenly the pendulum swings the other way quite dramatically, and so that can be kind of harrowing. So we'll talk a lot about Shivaratri, Navaratri, and of course spiritual retreats and things like that. When you get back, when you finish something like that, there can be a bit of a backlash. Even when you do a Purasharna, if you decide to like invest in a Purasharna and chant a lot of mantra over a period of time, then you finish with that Purasharna, sometimes you can get a reaction from it a little bit. The pendulum can swing the other way. So we'll talk a little bit about that, how to keep up the spiritual momentum throughout our spiritual life so that we're like sustainably practicing spirituality. Because many of us, the body is under the weather. We can also talk a little bit. Also, people have been writing into me asking about what to do if they're sick, they can't keep up a regular sadhana like that. So what should you do if the body is ill? What does sadhana look like at a time like that? Stuff like that. So if we have a little bit of time today, it'd be nice to explore those things also. Keeping up spiritual momentum and practicing sadhana while the body is physically ill. So having said that though, let's come back to Mā Bagalā and talk a little bit about Sarada Devi. And let's make a case for why Bagalā is so important for our tradition especially. Before I do that, I just want to like go into my camera and just like see everyone. Katyayani is here finally. We've missed you so much. Jaima. Are you home? No, is this the convent?
Yeah, this is the convent.
Oh, I don't know. The lighting just looked so different.
I
Anyway.
have a cozy.
Oh, it's cozy. Jaima, Jericho Ma, Jaima. There's Sai. Hey, Haryana is here. Jaima, good to see you. Vanchika Ma, Jaima. Simrit Ma, you might be new to us, but it's nice to see you, man. Jaima. Angie, Jaima. Hey, there's Caroline. Jaima. Suparnama, so good to see you. It feels like I haven't seen you in a very long time, all of you, because we've been away on retreat. We've been doing all these different retreats, so we haven't had so many Zooms. Anyway, it's good to see you. Hey, there's Caroline. Jaima. So good to see you, Ma. We missed you so much. Jaima. Okay, let's get to it. Jyoti is here with Shivaji. Jaima. Okay, let's get into some philosophy. Let's talk about some things. So first we'll start with this, Sarada Devi and her connection to Mā Bagalā, which is kind of a secret in our tradition actually. It's a very mysterious, very hush-hush kind of thing, which one only discovers once we're quite deep in the tradition. Swami Vivekananda in one place said that Sarada Devi is outwardly Ma Saraswati. She is Sarva Vidya, the embodiment of all wisdom. Sarva Vidya Swarupam. But you know what's interesting? Inwardly, Swami Vivekananda himself said this. Inwardly, she is Mā Bagalā. Is that a curious point? So of course, Sarada Devi is in our tradition seen as Shakti. She is the primordial power which takes on many different forms. Obviously, one of her main forms is Mahishasura Mardini, Ma Durga, or Jagadhatri. In fact, Jagadhatri was her Ishta Devi. Jagadhatri was her family Devata actually, and their family used to perform Jagadhatri Puja quite consistently every year in Jairambati. So Jagadhatri is particularly important for Sarada Devi, and arguably Sri Ramakrishna didn't give her a mantra because she already had a Jagadhatri mantra from the family guru that Sri Ramakrishna himself was initiated by. So that Kedaram Bhattacharya probably gave her a Jagadhatri mantra. But again, all of that is speculation. Though she is associated to Jagadhatri and to Mahishasura Mardini, though she has appeared to many people as Ma Kali, Swami Vivekananda says inwardly she is Bagalā. And this is perhaps with reference to a particular event that happened, which is worth revisiting. So one day, Harish was a very mature and spiritually advanced devotee of Sri Ramakrishna. He used to spend lots of time at Dakshineshwar. He would stay there, he would attend to the master like that. Harish was a very beloved disciple, devotee of the master. But then his wife was feeling kind of jealous because she felt like he had kind of abandoned her and he was kind of a deadbeat dad. He wasn't really at home a lot. He was off at the temple, at the feet of Sri Ramakrishna, pursuing his spiritual goals. So one day, she felt quite badly about all of this. So the wife one day went to a cremation ground, hired a tantric. I don't know that they went to a cremation ground, but probably the tantric then went to the cremation ground and performed some black magic in order to hex Harishji. So Harishji came under the influence of black magic. See, Bagalā is associated to the world of black magic, the world of cremation ground, tantric sorcerers, and whatnot. So she's the source of all black magic. So Harishji's wife puts a spell through on Harish by hiring this tantric adept. Then Harish, maddened by the spell, comes to the house one day and starts chasing Holy Mother around. Who knows what his intentions were? Some say it might have been sexual, he was possessed by some kind of lust, or some others say that he just went crazy. There's no explanation for it. There's no rhyme or reason for what he did. And it just came out of nowhere because he's such a gentle, beloved disciple of the masters. So anyway, he started chasing Sarada Devi around, and she at first started running away from him. Because after all, she's Lajja Vibhushitam. She's so reserved and so shy and so quiet. So of course, her first response is to run away from this guy. And she was all alone in the house. Everyone had gone out. Swami Saradanandaji was there, but he was out at that time. So she started running, and Harishji was chasing her all around. And after being chased around for a few times, suddenly something happened. She just stopped, turned around, and first she put her knee on his chest and pinned him to the ground. Then she grabbed his tongue and smacked him on the head. And the moment she smacked him on the head, the black magic was destroyed, was broken. The spell was broken. And she was yanked out of, he was yanked out of it, if you will. And then by that time, the commotion had attracted some people, and people came in and restrained him and whatnot. So we recently heard, I didn't know how the story ended, because that's up to that point only I had heard. But we were recently hearing from Swami Bhajanandaji how actually the wife came and apologized. She realized that what she had done was not okay, and then everyone was forgiven, and then they were all back on good terms. It's a very interesting story, because Mā Bagalā here is probably the cause of that spell. But here, Sarada Devi also plays the role of the one who breaks the spell and redeems us from the curse, if you will. Now, later, people would ask Sarada. They would say, well, Sri Ramakrishna is God. He's considered to be an avatara, the way Jesus is considered to be an avatara. But then who are you? I mean, you're Shakti, obviously. Do you know that? Are you aware of your own nature? Are you even Shakti? These questions people would often ask about Sarada Devi. And in response to one of these questions, somebody asked her, have there been moments when you realized this, that you were Shakti? And she cited this as one example. When she reverted to a true form, she was like, oh, in this moment, I recalled who I really was, Bagalā, or Kali or Shakti in the form of Bagalā. So I think that's an important thing in our lineage, that Sarada Devi, as Swami Vivekananda points out, is outwardly Saraswati. Outwardly, her name Sarada means Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom, inseparable from Sri Ramakrishna, the way he is inseparable from a fire. But inwardly, her special manifestation is Bagalā. And Bagalā is usually associated with the avatara. You'll see in the Mahavidya tradition, Bagalā, she wields a mace, which kind of links her a little bit sometimes to Vishnu. But also another thing is she arises from the ocean of turmeric in some cases, and she specifically restores the dharma. Yada yada hi dharmasya, like that. So she has a kind of avataric connotation, if you will. It's almost like the Mahavidya tradition. It parallels the Dashavatara tradition. So there are 10 Mahavidyas, 10 forms of Ma, and there are 10 incarnations of Vishnu. So you can see there's a little bit of a parallel between the Mahavidya tradition and the Dashavatara tradition. Having said that, though, Bagalā is especially linked to the avatara. So if Sri Ramakrishna can be considered the avatara, then it makes sense that his consort ought to be Bagalā. So that's why Bagalā is particularly important for our lineage. And what does Bagalā do? She stuns, she silences. Her mantra, there's a very powerful bija there, but her mantra basically says, Vacha Mukham Padam, speech, or Vach means speech, and Mukha means face, and Padam means feet. So speech, face, feet, stambhaya, immobilize my enemy. And then it says, Jivam Kilaya, and nail down his tongue, or catch hold of his tongue. And then the most dramatic one, Buddhim Nashaya, and destroy his intellect. I mean, that's what happened to Harish. His buddhi, his intellect, his discerning faculty, his reasoning faculty was all scrambled. It was destroyed. He wasn't able to discern right from wrong, what he ought to do, what he ought not to. Heyopadeya Nishchaya, as we say. He wasn't sure what to hold close and what to push away. So he acted out of turn. And so the mantra, it's specifically an invocation of Bagala for these ends, for the immobilizing of the speech, the face, and the feet, for the catching of the tongue, and for the annihilation of the mind. So Bagala, therefore, as you can see, is related to silence and stillness. Her bija is sometimes called the sthira maya, meaning the bija whose magic is sthira, stillness. So, like I've been saying, I think Bagla, you can make a case for her as the goddess of stillness and the goddess of silence. Now, let's come to this question. Is there such a thing as silence? Because I'm going to say the silence that Mā Bagalā engenders is a kind of silence in which divine speech is heard. That's the case I'm going to try to make. Okay, so let's try. Oh, but first, let's look at her dhyana mantra. So yesterday was her Jayanti, but I remember on Thursday we had a discussion about how to worship Mā Bagalā, and we looked at one of her tantras. So let me take you to that now. There's a tantra that we've been working on, and so here's the Mā Bagalā tantra. And like I told you on Thursday, we just have all of the hard copies of these, and they're all in Devanagari hard copy. And so those who read and understand Devanagari, no problem. But it's not that accessible for those who have no access to Devanagari. So we've been working to try to translate them and more importantly, transliterate them. So here is the Bagalamukhi Tantram, Atta Bagalamukhi Tantram, Atta Bagalamukhi Dhyanam. Here is the meditation on Mā Bagalā. So we should probably start with that. मध्ये शुद्धाब्दि मणिमण्डप रत्नवेदी सिंहासनोपरि गतां परिपीतवर्णां पीताम्बराभरण माल्यविभूषिताङ्गीं देवीं नमामि धृतमुद्रार भैरिजीवां जीवाग्रमादाय करेण देवीं वामेन शत्रून् परिपीडयन्तीं गदा भीघातेन च दक्षिणेन पीताम्बराढ्यां द्विभुजां नमामि. In the midst, or in the middle, madhye, in the midst of the nectar ocean, Shuddhabdi Mani Mandapa, in a pavilion made of wish-fulfilling gems, seated on top of a lion throne, atop a jeweled platform, Ratnavedi, Singhasanopari. Upari means on top of a Singhasan, a lion throne, on a dais of jewels, Ratnavedi. Her complexion is Paripita Varnam, fully yellow, completely yellow. Paripita Varnam. Pita means yellow. So one of her names actually is Pitambari. Pitambari means the yellow one. So whose complexion is entirely yellow. Pitambharabharana malya. So her limbs are adorned with yellow garments and ornaments. Ambara means clothes, so Pitambara means yellow clothes, and Abhrana means jewelry. So Pitabhrana means yellow jewelry. So not only does she have yellow clothes, she also has yellow jewelry, and she's wearing a yellow mala, a garland of yellow flowers. Her limbs are adorned with yellow garments, ornaments, and a garland. I worship that goddess who holds a mace. Gada, she's holding a mace and grasps the enemy's tongue. Shatrun, she's grabbing his tongue, like Qui-Gon Jinn in episode 1 of Star Wars, like grabbing Jar Jar Binks' tongue like that. She's grabbing the enemy's tongue and she's holding a mace. Then it says, I worship that two-armed goddess, Dvibhujam Namami. I praise her who has two arms, who seizes the tip of the enemy's tongue with her Vamena, with her left hand, tormenting them, while striking with a mace held in her right hand, resplendent in yellow garments. So these are two verses. You can consider them both like dhyana mantras in and of themselves. Together, they kind of repeat a few themes. But I think that repetition is quite important. You know, that we repeat over and over that she's wearing yellow because yellow is really important to her. And often we say when we worship Mā Bagalā, it's important that we wear yellow, at least one piece of yellow cloth because she's delighted by the color yellow. Usually she's worshipped with like turmeric, haldi, which is yellow, and she's worshipped by devotees wearing yellow. And when you do her japa, you often do it on a turmeric mala. So the mala is of turmeric root, the seed of the turmeric or the turmeric roots, and covered in turmeric. So like that. She loves turmeric. And you can dip rice, white rice in turmeric, and you can offer those turmeric akshatas. So anyway, this is particular to Mā Bagalā, she's very fond of yellow flowers. Sri Ramakrishna himself was very fond of yellow colored flowers. Somebody asked him, "What are your favorite flowers?" And I think in one place he said yellow. His favorite colored flowers are yellow, and a holy mother is sometimes given yellow flowers too. And now you know why. Perhaps because of that link with Mā Bagalā. So yellow, that's one thing that's very important for Mā Bagalā. And you can see in her dhyana mantra already there is that connotation of catching the tongue, of stunning, and a kind of ferocity. So you can see she's a rather aggressive deity. She's holding weapons, but she's also a very regal deity. As you can see with Mā Sarada Devi, there's a very queen-like countenance. Yeah, there it is, like a sunflower or something. And so that regality is very inherent to Sarada Devi. And this goddess, Bagala, is seated atop a lion's throne, which implies sovereignty. She is Bhagavati. She is Maheshwari or Ishwari. She is the ruler of the entire cosmos. And so, of course, she sits upon a throne the way a ruler might, a regent. So she's sitting on this jewel-encrusted platform on top of a lion's throne. And she's in this pavilion of jewels, which is very interesting. It's very unique. And in the middle of an ocean of nectar. What does that even mean? Or an ocean of yellow turmeric, but it's just such a beautiful thing to visualize. This ocean of nectar and a jewel encrusted pavilion in the middle of it, and in the middle of that, like a raised dais of jewels, and on top of that, there's this lion's throne, and she's seated on top of that, covered in yellow garments, in yellow ornaments, in yellow garlands, with her left hand holding the tongue of a demon, and with her right hand bopping them on the head. Little rabbit, foo foo. So we looked at the thing. Oh, maybe we can look at the yantra also if you like. These are, of course, very secret elements of the tantras. So these tantras are, of course, held by gurus. Oh my God, sorry. And then upon initiation, these things are revealed. The dhyana mantra is revealed, and after the dhyana mantra, then the yantra, and then the mula mantra. So this is with a lot of reverence that we do this. We're offering this dhyana mantra, but it's usually offered in the strictest of initiatory settings. So to maintain its sacredness and its purity. So now this next thing, the yantra. Just a single line in the tantram, and from that we're supposed to be able to recreate the yantra. Trayastram, Shadashram, Vritam, Ashtadalam, Padma, Bhupuranvitam. A triangle, a hexagon, and a circle, together forming a lotus of 8 petals, Ashtadalam Padma, complete with the protective enclosure, Bhupura. Thus is the form of the sacred diagram, yantra. And I was learning from Swami Bhajananandaji yesterday that the yantra, when it's engraved upon some substance, it's better to choose brass than copper, because brass is more yellow. So a yantra is usually embossed on brass. So this is how it looks like. This is a reproduction of it. A triangle inside a hexagram within an 8-petaled lotus inside of a bhupura. So typically when Mā Bagalā is worshipped, she's worshipped as a yantra. She's a pure primeval energy, if you will. And that energy is depicted by this sacred geometric pattern. And so we worship her directly on the yantra. Right? Yeah, and then there are like instructions for how to derive the mantra also over here. But anyway, we don't need to go into that right now. But it's enough to know that Bagala is an important, very important deity for our lineage because of all the aforementioned reasons. Now let's start to talk about silence. We'll start with Advaita Vedanta. Now, in the view of Advaita Vedanta, and I'm just going to recap a few things that I said last night in last night's talk, or yesterday morning's talk at the Kali Mandir, just reviewing some of the things there for those of you who were in attendance. So the first thing we said yesterday is this. In the Upanishads, the word that is used for the ultimate nature of reality is Brahman. So this is a neuter, singular noun, and it means the vast. It comes from the Sanskrit root bri, which means to expand or the vast. So Brahman refers to the absolute, the highest reality, if you will. And this Brahman is generally considered to be existence in and of itself, consciousness in and of itself, and bliss in and of itself. So you can't say Brahman exists in the way that a table exists or a chair exists. Brahman doesn't exist. Brahman is that by which things have their existence. So it's like what Brahman is to all existing things is like what water is to all waves in the ocean. You can't say water is a wave, but because of the water, waves exist. The wave is a formation of water. So water is the substance of a wave in a sense. Similarly, existence in and of itself is the substance, if you will, of all existence. Existence like this is the word, existence, which means things that exist, right? And existence is that substance, that power, that reality through which the existence exists. Okay, so you can't say Brahman exists. Brahman is existence in and of itself. Then, more importantly, Brahman is consciousness, as we learned in a very old Upanishad, Pragyanam Brahma. So, Brahman cannot be known in the way like 2 plus 2 equals 4 can be known. Brahman is not an object of consciousness. Brahman is consciousness in and of itself. So Brahman is knowing in and of itself. It's the power whereby things are known. And then very mysteriously, Brahman is called the infinite. Ananta, that's the formulation we get in the Taittiriya Upanishad, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. But that Ananta is also considered to be synonymous with Ananda. So Ananta means infinite, limitless. And limitlessness is synonymous with bliss, Ananda. As we learn in the Chandogya Upanishad, Yo vai bhuma tat sukham, nalpe sukhamasti. If something is vast, then alone is there joy. If something is limited, there is no joy. So joy and freedom are synonymous, and that's synonymous with limitlessness. So Brahman is considered to be existence in and of itself, consciousness in and of itself, and limitlessness, which also means bliss. So far, so good, right? This is the absolute nature of reality as described by the Upanishads, Brahman. Now, all of the various schools of Indian philosophy are all just an attempt to understand this Brahman or to figure out what the relationship is between the world, the individual souls, quote unquote, God, and Brahman. So, Brahman is not necessarily God. In fact, Brahman is more like Godhead, if that word can be used. It's like the very substance out of which God, the world, and the individual souls are composed. And it's like God is like the sum total of all waves. Individual souls are like the waves, and the world is like the ocean. But arguably, this is even prior to all that. It's prior to the sum total of all waves. It's prior to even the waves. It's prior even to the ocean. It's water. Asha got a little smack. Natalie Ma, we missed you so much, time. I enjoyed that so much. Your face, you're like, the tail whip. That was like a Zen teaching, you know. It was like a particularly deep point about Brahman being prior to all waves. So the ocean metaphor is very important because it was provided by the Chandogya Upanishad as well as the clay and pots metaphor. So all clay pots, they have a different name, a different form, a different function, but they're ultimately all made of clay. And gold ornaments, they might all have a different name, a different form, a different function, but they're all made of gold. So as gold is to all gold ornaments, as clay is to all clay pots, and as water is to all waves, so too is Brahman to all reality. So Brahman is the absolute. And so that's the main term that we have to understand, Brahman. And what is the nature of Brahman? Now, in Shankara's Kevala Advaita, it's called Advaita Vedanta usually, but I think Kevala Advaita is a very good term because it tells you exactly what this philosophy is about. Kevala means alone or only. Advaita means non-duality. So Kevala Advaita means non-duality only. But another way of understanding this is Brahman only. So this is the philosophy of Brahman alone exists. Everything else is an illusion, an appearance in Brahman. It's called Vivarta in Sanskrit. So Brahma Satyam, Brahman is real. Jagat Mithya, the world is false. Jiva Brahmeva na paraha. So there's no difference between the individual soul and Brahman. You are Brahman, but the entire universe is an appearance in Brahman. And yes, as just Sat is pointing out, it's important to remember that for Shankara, Brahman is nirguna, without any qualities whatsoever, nirvishesha, without any specification whatsoever, and without any action, nishkriya. Brahman is absolutely still. No, not quite. Because here, the world is considered to be false. So it cannot be pantheism or panentheism. It's a supreme transcendentalism or a kind of idealism, if you will, because the world is considered to be entirely false. And that's where we come to something very unique in Advaita Vedanta, the doctrine of falsity. It's called mithyatva. So mithyatva means unrealness. And here's what Shankara will have to say to prove falsity. He's going to say that Brahman is real. However, what we experience is the world. And in the world, there are many different individuals. It seems like there's a kind of duality here where I'm over here and the world is over there and there are all these different things. And as long as there's a world, then there must be God. In fact, in the scriptures, almost always the definition for God and the proof for God is, like we said last week and the week before that, based on causality. The world exists as an effect, therefore God has to exist as a real cause. Like we learned in a few lectures previous to this one, Jagat Karya Darshanat. Because I see this world as a complex effect, and given the gendered complexity even there is in this world, there must be some agent, Asti Karta. We learned Asmat Prabhuharaha. We learned that there has to be God because that's the only way to explain this world as an effect. So now Shankara will ask this question: is this world really an effect? For instance, is the wave really an effect of the water? To answer this question, we have to ask another question: is there water in the wave? And this is a very deep, very, very deep question. Is there water in the wave? It seems kind of pedantic and weirdly semantic, but actually it's very nuanced and subtle. And when we can make this kind of flip in our mind, we can understand rightly what Shankara means when he says there is no world. So is there water in the wave? That's a question to ask. Is there water inside the wave? The way there is like tea inside this cup, for instance. And you'll see that, like, no, it's weird to say there's water in the wave because the moment you say there's water in the wave, you're implying that you can take the water out and there would still be a wave. As if there's such a thing called a wave into which water is poured. You see how weird that is? There is no wave without the water. So you can't say there's water in the wave because if you were to take all the water out of the wave, it's not like you would be left with some ghostly outline of a wave. There's no such thing as a wave per se. So how would you phrase this differently? You can't say there's water in the wave. So what then do you say? What's a better way of saying it? What do you think? And Ruth is coming to it. Is it something like of the water? Like, is there water in the wave? No, the wave is made of water. So you can't say there's water in the wave. You say the wave is in the water. So you flip it. If you say there's water in the wave, you're saying there's such a thing called wave, and then inside you can put water. Now, if I drink all this tea, I'll still have a cup. I hope. Because there's tea in the cup. The cup is something other than the tea. So I can drink all the tea and I'll still have a cup. But if I take out all the water out of the wave, I won't have a wave anymore. So the wave is in the water. Hey, Jazz, I miss you so much. Yeah, so there's wave in the water, okay? So this sounds very semantic, but it's profound because of this. If there is no wave per se, can you call the wave an effect? You see, it's not like the water caused the wave, because if the water caused the wave, the cause must be distinct from the effect, just like milk is distinct from the yogurt. They're two different products. They're, of course, properties of milk inhere in yogurt. They're both dairy. And if some of you eat it, you'll die because you're lactose intolerant. So both the dairy, both the yogurt and the water have dairy in it, but they're two different things. Dahi is one thing, and kshira is another thing. So importantly, if you're going to say the water is the cause and the wave is the effect, well, you better have a wave to begin with to point to as an effect. But because we don't have a wave per se, you have no effect. So according to Sri Shankara, the clay pot is not the effect of clay. The wave is not the effect of water. And the ornament is not the effect of gold. They are appearances in gold. They are forms of gold. Yeah, water just appears as a wave, exactly. So the word that Shankara uses here is vivarta. So if you're going to say God exists because God is the cause, then Shankara has just annihilated causality here. He's showing us that Brahman is not the cause for the world any more than wave is a cause for water. It is water. Do you see? Very subtle, but very beautiful. So what Shankara has done is he's dispensed with God. Like ultimately, Shankara is going to tell us that Brahman alone exists, and we have come along and superimposed onto Brahman God, individual souls, and world. So these three things, Ishvara, Jiva, and Jagat, they are false readings of the real Brahman. They're all misattributions or misperceptions of the one true Brahman. Now, Brahman, being pure non-dual consciousness, is, and everything else is not. Everything is an appearance in Brahman, a vivarta in Brahman. Now, he's going to say something even more drastic. He's going to say, and look at the nature of the individual souls and the nature of the world. Does it not change? It's changing. It's dynamic. And therefore, it must be impermanent. So this he has in common with the Buddha. Both the Buddha and Sri Shankara use impermanence as a justification for illusion. So Buddha is going to say the whole world is an illusion. He'll say, Shanikam, Shanikam, Sarvam, Shanikam. Everything is momentary. Haven't you noticed? Now the body is ill. It's momentary. It'll be healthy soon. And then now the body is healthy. It's momentary. It'll be dead soon. So the thing is, bodies, minds, all of these things are so momentary. The world is so momentary. Shanikam, shanikam, sarvam shanikam. And therefore you can imply from this, you can derive from this, anityam, anityam, sarvam anityam. Transient, transient. Everything is transient. Therefore, shunyam, shunyam, sarvam shunyam. Void, void, everything is void. That sounds like a leap of logic. How did you go from everything is impermanent to everything is unreal? Do you see? Is this a metaphysical claim or a psychological one? That's a question worth asking. Is the Buddha making a metaphysical claim here or just a psychological one? Maybe he's just saying, like, therefore it's meaningless. So when he says the world is void, he might not actually mean it's unreal. He's just saying that, like, well, you're gonna be disappointed. It's not really satisfying. It doesn't mean it's metaphysically unreal. If you take the Buddha literally, then he's saying the world is unreal. Shankara is also making the same claim. The world is unreal, mityatva, meaning false. Why? Because of impermanence. And there's a very profound logical argument for this, actually. And it goes like this. It's a bit difficult, but I think quite beautiful. It's like this. If I take water and I put it in a pan, and then I put that pan on the stove, the water heats up. When I take the pan off the stove, the water cools down. So we have to ask this question. Is heat an intrinsic property of water? No, because the water was not hot, and then it became hot, and then it stopped being hot. So heat is something that came and went in the water. So therefore, it's not a swarupa lakshana. In other words, it's not an inherent property of water. Heat is not an inherent property of water, right? Wetness is. Right? Wetness is an inherent property of water. You can't really have dry water. The definition of what it means to be water is to be wet, right? But it doesn't mean like water doesn't necessarily have to be hot. In fact, in Japan, the Japanese language is a specific word for hot water. It's different from the word for water. It's like a different thing almost. Anyway, notice how this is true of the body. The body comes into existence, it exists for a while, and then it goes out of existence. So, or rather, you put that another way, existence comes into the body. So then body's born. Existence stays in the body for a little while the body lives its life. And then when the body dies, existence goes out of the body. So is existence an inherent property of the body? No. You see, existence is not an inherent property of the body any more than heat is an inherent property of the body. So what do you say then about the body? It doesn't exist. It's not inherently existing. And therefore, mityatva, it's false. Same is true of the mind. So using a slew of incredibly nuanced logical arguments, Shankara manages to show that the body, mind, world, and God are all illusory. They're all mental superimpositions onto Brahman. But most importantly, Shankara has, for the basis of his philosophy, a kind of experience. We can call this experience nirvikalpa samadhi. Logic isn't enough. You can't just push your glasses up your nose and say, well, actually, like in Indian spirituality, you require something more than that to make a claim. You need some kind of spiritual experience. And so the specific spiritual experience here that gives Shankara the basis for his claim is called Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which means an experience of the absolute, devoid of all attributes, devoid of all qualities. It's like no one can describe it because it's like a salt doll goes into the ocean and tries to measure its depths. So Sri Ramakrishna used to talk about it. You can't really say what it's like. If somebody asks you, what's ghee like? We'd be like, it's like ghee. So it's this experience that informs Shankara's view that Brahman alone is real and the world is false. Now, here's the important thing. The metaphor that Shankara uses to describe all of this is the rope and the snake. So the rope is the real thing, Brahman, the absolute nature of reality. You see, Shankara is basically Buddhism, but importantly, it says one thing, that the ultimate nature of reality is Brahman. And then it accepts all the Vedas and everything like that. But anyway, so Brahman is the rope here. The world, individual souls, God, these are superimpositions on Brahman, like when you are looking at a rope in the dark and you mistake it for a snake. There's not really a snake there, there's only a rope, but you perceive it wrongly because there's like a little bit of light and you're looking at the rope and you think it's a snake and you have an emotional reaction to it. So, oh my God, a snake. So that snake is not a second thing other than Brahman. It's Brahman all along. It's the rope all along. But it's a false reading of Brahman. It's a misperception of the real thing. So don't think the snake is a second thing. It's the real thing, but it's being perceived wrongly. So therefore, what Shankara argues, and this is the TLDR of it, is that there is only one reality called Brahman, existence, consciousness, bliss. And in each and every moment, we are missing it because we are superimposing onto it our own mind projected idea of world, individual souls, and God. So, like, if you were to go to Brahman and if you were like, oh my God, why did this horrible thing happen in the world? It would be like you're a schizophrenic, like going and trying to tell someone else that your reality is shared. Like, Brahman will be like, bro, what? And Brahman isn't it. It's not, it won't have anything to say about it. But it's like, it's in your head. This whole universe with all of its problems and beings and gods and goddesses is in your head. It's nothing to do with Brahman. The snake has nothing to do with the rope. Can you say the rope projected the snake? Never. The rope is not responsible for the snake. It did not conjure up a snake. A snake appeared where there was a real rope. But the reason the snake appeared is because you came along and saw it that way. See, the rope is not responsible for the snake. So according to Sri Shankara, in ignorance, we experience the world. In knowledge, arguably this can only be had in Nirvikalpa Samadhi according to one school of thought. In knowledge, you experience Brahman, which is without any qualities, without any specific attribution, and without any action. So one very important quality of Brahman, if you can call it a quality, is that it's pure silence. It's being in and of itself. It's silence and it's stillness. And this is considered to be the absolute nature of reality. Yes, Brahman is silent and still. So therefore, the Tantric non-dualists, they refer to Shankara's school as Shanta Brahma Vada, the doctrine of the quiescent Brahman. Or I guess you could say the quietistic Brahman. So this is the absolute that doesn't, if you will, dance. It doesn't sing. It doesn't, all of that happens on a lower level of reality. All of that happens in Vyavahara, which is called, what you might call them, empirical or functional reality. It's only in ignorance that I perceive speech and dynamism and all of that. So Brahman does not have a dynamic aspect. I think that's the main thing to take away from this part of the lecture. Brahman does not move or vibrate or anything like that. Brahman just is. And another thing to understand is that Brahman is consciousness, not conscious. So Brahman is prakasha only. To use the Sanskrit phrase prakasha, it's illumination only. It's self-luminous, but it's not, and it's very important, it's not self-aware. Many people don't understand this actually about Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, is that Brahman is not self-aware in the way that maybe a human is. A human can say, I am. Or a human can say like, oh, I know that I am. But according to Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, it's like only when there is a mind can you do that. So the mind acts as a sort of mirror. If you have a mind, then consciousness can look into the mirror of the mind and perceive itself. That's what happens when a subtle body comes in front of consciousness. It's like when Rahu comes in front of the sun, you get an eclipse. So Rahu is only visible when he comes in front of the sun. Just like that, consciousness is only self-aware when it comes into contact with a subtle body. This is a very important point. But when there is no mind, buddhim nashaya, when the mind is destroyed, when you're in nirvikalpa samadhi, who will be aware of what? Consciousness is not self-aware. So you can't describe it. It's beyond all language, beyond all conception even. But the thing to understand, according to Shankara's divine inspiration, the thing to understand is that this is prakasha only. So when we think of Brahman, according to Sri Shankara, according to Advaita Vedanta, what you have is an inert, meaning actionless, qualityless, absolute, who is existence, consciousness, bliss, which is existence, consciousness, bliss, and it's prakasha only. So we can call this Shanta Brahma Vada, the doctrine of the quiescent Brahman, or we can call it Kevala Advaita. I'm going to choose to call it the Prakasha only model for today, okay? So Prakasha means consciousness without necessarily implying, being conscious. And Just Seth is asking, wait, in the Tantric view, is there only dynamism? No, there's a static aspect also. But that static aspect is never without its dynamism. So we'll come to that now. Let's come to the Tantric view. So in Shankara's view, there is only the dynamic, there's only the static aspect. Nirguna, Nirvishesha, Brahman. And so I'm going to call this the Prakasha only view. Illumination only. Consciousness without any self-awareness view. Prakasha only. Now let's come to Tantric non-duality. Here, everything Shankara says is accepted actually, except for Mityatva, falsity. So this static aspect, this Nirguna Nirvishesha Brahman, is accepted. However, instead of calling it Brahman, we choose to call it Shiva. Brahman is a neuter term, meaning it's neither male nor female. Shiva is a masculine gender term. So here you can see there are a bit more Sankhyan roots. Sankhya is really there behind every Indian school of philosophy, but I think the Shaiva schools or the Tantric schools pay a bit more allegiance to Sankhya because Kapila Muni might have been a cremation ground dwelling like Shaiva. So with that in mind, and then of course Shankara himself not only was a Shaiva, but Shankara himself was Shiva. Like we had a special on Shankara last week because it was his birthday. I'm very fond of Shankara, by the way. Like it sometimes sounds like I debate against Shankara. I never mean to. Like he's like, we pay full allegiance to him. He's Shiva. He's an avatar of Shiva. And again, like these are philosophies that are all relevant in their particular times, and they're all true. Each and every one of these philosophies are true. So I'm not trying to privilege the tantric non-dual position over and above Advaita Vedanta. I would never do that. Advaita Vedanta is one of my favorite things in the entire world. Like, and you know, many of you have been here. I've been teaching Advaita Vedanta 3-4 years before I touch any of the tantric stuff because I think it's a really great foundation for so many things. And I love it. It's such an elegant and beautiful philosophy, and it has it's really powerful, you know, because like when things are getting heavy, and when you're burdened by life, to hold this view that the world is just a passing show, it's fleeting, it's momentary, it's temporal. It's a wonderfully liberating idea. You know, and so I've been throughout my life, been very fond of texts like the Ashtavakra Gita and the Avaduta Gita. Texts like this have been very helpful to me. So Advaita Vedanta is wonderful. So now I'm going to compare it to the Tantric view. Not to say the Tantric view is better, just different. It has a slightly different way of approaching reality. So here's what the Tantric view is going to say. It's going to say like, okay, this Nirguna Nirvishesha aspect is correct. That's an experience too. It's called Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So in that experience, you can say that Brahman, which is existence in and of itself, consciousness in and of itself, we can just call it Shiva. Shiva here means Prakasha, illumination, Shiva. But, and this is the key, Shiva is always with Shakti. Not that Shakti is a second to Shiva, but importantly, Shakti is the essence of Shiva. So Abhinavagupta defines Shakti as Shiva Swabhavaha iti Shakti. So the very essence of Shiva is Shakti. Now the argument, like as Sethji is pointing out, is like, you can't have dynamism without stillness, and you can't have stillness without dynamism because the two terms involve each other. So you can't have Shiva without Shakti, and you can't have Shakti without Shiva. But to just Seth's point, actually the Shakta traditions try to move us more into a Shakti-only view. Which you see sometimes from time to time. Although my whole life, I've just grown up in a Shaiva world. I'm a Shaiva through and through. But my devotion to Divine Mother sometimes moves me in a more Shakta or direction. And so I can be a bit fanatical in that way. So you might find me towing the Shakta line a bit more from time to time, where it's like I move towards a dynamism only model. So there are definitely dynamism only models where it's like Shakti only. And then we would make claims like this. We would say, okay, so she is Icha, the will, the energy of Lord Shiva. What would you get if you take away E from the word Shiva? See, Shiva, if you take away the E, the Icha Shakti, what would be left? Shava, exactly, corpse. So Shiva without E, Katyayani knows because she's studying Sanskrit. If you take away the E from Shiva, the word Shiva, if you don't have that little hook over the she, it becomes Sha. You know, without the she, without the E, Sha plus Va just means corpse, Shava. So if Shiva doesn't have his Shakti, then he's just a corpse. What's the point in worshipping him? Sri Ramakrishna would speak like that from time to time too. He would say, if God didn't have the bhagas, all the qualities like Aishwarya, Tejas, Virya, like if God didn't have all those splendors that makes God God, who will listen to him? So Sri Ramakrishna would joke about that. Like there's something that makes God God. Similarly, there's something that makes Shiva Shiva, and that is his dynamic aspect called Shakti. So according to Abhinavagupta, you can't think of Shiva without Shakti. Sri Ramakrishna would say, Brahma Shakti Abhed. The Brahman and its Shakti are non-different. Jini Brahma, Tini Shakti, Tini Ma. That which I call Ma is verily Shakti, and that is verily Brahman. Yeah, right. You can't think of one without Shakti, but as Kristen is pointing out, you can't even think without Shakti. Nothing happens without Shakti, because Shakti is the energy of the entire universe who creates, maintains, destroys, reveals, and conceals. So that Shakti is to Shiva what heat is to a fire, what whiteness is to milk, what wetness is to water. Yeah. Huh. And now, Just Seth is asking the key question in today's lecture. In the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, in what way does Shakti appear in that experience? right? Is it just like sublated? Is it only in potential? Like this is really a really profound and really deep question, and that's what I mean to answer hopefully in the course of this discussion. So now let's come to it. So in tantric non-duality, we have to remember that it's not prakasha only, it's prakasha plus one more thing, which is, as you can call, as you can see, is not a second thing, it's not an added thing, it is the essence of prakasha, it's the essence of Brahman, or in other words Shiva, and it's called Shakti, but another word for it is vimarsha. So prakasha plus vimarsha is the absolute nature of reality in tantric non-duality, whereas in kevala advaita of Sri Shankara it's prakasha only. Here it's prakasha with vimarsha, or prakasha, which is essentially vimarsha. So Shakti, what is she? Like we just chanted in the beginning of this talk, no michit pratibham devim param bhairava yoginim matarmana prameyamsha shula bhuja kritaspadam. Naomi, I praise that goddess Devi who is named Pratibha. Pratibha means intuition, actually. It means like insight or intuition, and it's here hyphened with the word chit. So Naomi chit pratibham devim. I praise that goddess who is the intuition of awareness, or who is the insight of awareness. This refers to Vimarshana. Vimarsha Shakti. The word Vimarsha from the root Mrisha means to touch. So the goddess is always touching herself, if you will. She's in touch with herself. These are all various connotations, but she's aware of herself. So the idea is that Vimarshana is Lord Shiva's ability to repose in his own prakasha. In other words, to repose in his own self. Svatma Vishranti. So without vimarshana, you have prakasha, meaning you just have consciousness. But with vimarsha, you have consciousness that is able to articulate I am. See, in the Advaita Vedanta worldview, you need to have a mind to do this. When the mind is gone, language is gone, meaning there is no ability to even intuitively or precognitively say I am. You can't articulate I amness without a mind, without language. To be able to say I am, you require language and a mind. And by language, I don't necessarily mean words like, oh, it's not like je suis Nishant or something like that. You know, it's not like I need to have some kind of a way of saying it. It's something even prior to that. It's a deep, intuitive understanding, self-awareness, if you will. And that, for Advaita Vedanta, requires a mind. For that, you need a mind. But in this tradition, in Tantric non-duality, it's built into the absolute nature of reality. Once, Swami Sarvapradaji said, you guys are trying to import the mind into Brahman. I thought it was a very interesting insight. He was saying that in tantric non-duality, it's like we're trying to bring elements of the mind, you know. Anyway, that we don't need to get into that right now. But the idea of self-awareness in Advaita Vedanta is dependent on the mind, but here it's not. Here, Prakasha means Vimarsha. So Shiva is always self-aware. Now, what is Shiva's self-awareness? Shakti. So by Shakti, what we mean by Shakti is Shiva's ability to be self-aware. Shiva's self-awareness is Shakti. So sometimes you can consider Shakti like a mirror through which Shiva relishes in his own being. Or you don't even need to use the word Shiva or Shakti. You can just say Brahman. And Brahman is endowed with the inherent I amness. And that I amness is a self-awareness. So that, we argue, is a kind of language. This is what we call Parā-Vāc. So now we come to it. What is the experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi? In this tradition, we argue that it is of the nature I am. So it's pure I amness. When you attain the highest reality, what you attain is not just awareness. You attain awareness endowed with self-awareness. So you become aware of yourself as Purna Hankta, as the all-encompassing totality. So Para means supreme, Vak means word. And the thing to remember from today's lecture is that there is no such thing as silence, because even at the ultimate nature of reality, Brahman, which is pure silence, there is always, at every given moment, and not to speak in terms of time here, because this is beyond all time, there is always this Parā-Vāc. And it really is nothing more necessarily than I am, the awareness that I am. So now we come to language. What exactly is language? By definition, it is an act of consciousness, right? It's an act. Language, it's a speech act. Like language is an act. So it's a dynamic aspect of consciousness. It's an act of consciousness. And what kind of act? It's a revelatory act. So for instance, maybe you've never heard of Pratyangira Devi, one of the fierce goddesses. In South India, she's particularly venerated. She's worshipped with chilies. So when you do a homa, you use a lot of chilies, and sometimes the eyes will tear up. But if you're doing a good homa, they won't. That's how you know that you're doing a good homa. Your eyes don't tear up. But anyway, so now I'm telling you about Pratyangira. She has a lion's head. She's got fierce fangs. She's got 8 eyes. It's a wonderful Google, actually. She's a very fierce deity. Some people call her Tivra, meaning intense. There's Ugra, Tivra. There are different kinds of deities. She is intense. She's fierce, ferocious. She's a ferocious deity. Her name is Pratyangira. Pratyangira. Okay, so what have I just done? I have used language, which is a dynamic faculty of consciousness, and I've used it in order to reveal something. Something that was not known before or only potentially known is now known. Pratyangira. So if you've never heard of Pratyangira before, now you know. So that's revelation. So notice, language is an act of consciousness which reveals. That's by definition what language is. Now check this out. Shakti is Shiva's self-awareness, yes? Is that not the dynamic aspect of consciousness? So Shiva is consciousness. The dynamism of Shiva is called Shakti. And basically, Shakti is Shiva's self-awareness, Shiva's I am. In other words, Shiva revealing himself to himself. So Parā-Vāc is Shakti, the dynamic aspect of consciousness, which is self-revelation. So therefore, there is language there. Because by language, we mean self-revelation. Do you see? It all hinges upon this definition of language. We're choosing to define language merely as this I am. How beautiful. What a beautiful idea. So this is called Parā-Vāc. And it's always there. It'll never go away. There's never going to be a reality, arguably, where there isn't that Parā-Vāc. So now, language is vimarsha. Yes, language is reflection. The moment you use language, you're reflecting. You're reflecting on something. That's why it's good, actually, to do this. So I'm speaking to you now. It's for my own good that I do this. It's for my own good that I speak to you because I can marinate my mind in these ideas which are so meaningful to me. It's my act of reflection. By speaking to you, I'm reflecting upon these ideas that I may integrate them more fully. So once I asked Swami Sarabhaji, actually, I was like, oh man, like, Maharaj, give me some advice. I feel like this is really bad for my spirituality. This is a very complicated position to be in. And it was so beautiful, and he's been a very important mentor of mine throughout this whole journey. And he said something really profound. He almost acted shocked, like that I'd said this. And I was like, oh, Maharaj, bless me that one day I may attain silence and just stop doing this. Now I feel compelled to, but hopefully one day I'll grow out of it or something. Then he got shocked. And then he said to me, no, teach. And I said, I know I don't mean to teach or anything. I'm just sharing ideas that are exciting to me, etc. And he said, no, teach. Teach because then you will learn twice. He said it's a great blessing. It's God's grace alone to find yourself in such a position. So that Swami Sarabhaji's point here is that whatever you say to somebody, actually you're saying to yourself. That's why we have to be careful about what we say to others. Because all language is an act of self-reflection. That's a beautiful idea too. Even vaikari, even spoken word, what you say about others is only indicative of what you feel about yourself. You have to have it in you to be able to call it out in others to some extent. Otherwise, you wouldn't even see it. You wouldn't even recognize it. You'll be focusing on something else. So if you say to somebody, you're stupid, it's only because on some level you think that about yourself. Hence, you're projecting it outward. So one way to correct for that is just not to say that to others. To focus on those things that inspire you about others and to speak to that only. So all language is self-reflection. It's vimarshana. Vimarshana means self-reflection. So what I say to others is just me reflecting on myself. That's one takeaway from this idea in a more practical sense. But in any case, on the ultimate nature of reality, there is vimarshana. So you cannot, in the non-dual tantric view, have Shiva without Shakti. So in some sense, we might be rejecting the Nirvikalpa Samadhi model of Shiva only, but there's still a way to accommodate that, to say that in that case, Shakti is present only as I am, right? There's no other expression besides that I am, but that can never go away. You can't have Prakasha without Vimarsha. But Vimarsha can be sublated, or it can be veiled, in a sense. That's why you have inert objects, if you will. So it's possible to have that reality without Vimarsha, just like it's possible to have a rock. In any case, inertness is a problem for this tradition, I think. Because how can something be inert when everything is consciousness, and if consciousness is inherently self-conscious? What do you say about inertness. That's a deep conversation, and maybe it's a conversation for another night. But to say that there's Shiva without Shakti, that's not available for the tantric non-dualist. Because by Shiva is meant Shakti. One term involves the other. So that's the difference. See, both are great traditions. In Advaita Vedanta, you might have a Shiva only tradition, silence only. Whereas here, in tantric non-duality, Shiva always comes with Shakti, and by Shakti we just mean self-awareness. Okay, how's that? That's cool, right? That's a cool idea. So you're never without speech. There's always speech. And the ultimate nature of reality, there's a divine speech, which means speech is reclaimed as spiritual. You see, traditions that are very silence oriented, they're usually against speech. But we're pro speech, after all. Otherwise, we wouldn't be using so many mantras. The whole tantric world is about mantra, 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 and mantra is nothing but a speech act, you see. So, because speech inheres at the highest level of reality, it's therefore part of our practice on every level. But traditions that are not into speech, they might be sometimes not so into like ritual or the use of mantra or japa or things like that. So, having said that, speech is the absolute nature of reality. Parā-Vāc. The highest level of reality is nothing but divine speech. And it is transcendent. Para means transcendent, but it's so transcendent that it's also immanent. So there are three levels of speech within para, if you will. One is called Vaikari, which is how we're speaking right now. It's the most dualistic form of speech. Then there's Madhyama, which is dualistic come non-dualistic. That's the mind level of speech. And then there's this very mysterious one called Pashanti. So these three can be considered to be apara, para, and para. There's one which is called the dualistic, one which is called the dualistic come non-dualistic, and one which is called the non-dualistic. These are Vaikari, Madhyama, and Pashanti, respectively. So these three are like 3 points of the trident, and para is the one that holds all three together. So para is that I am, which vibrates, which oscillates in and through all these other levels. So even in Vaikari, when I speak to you like this, there is always this inward throb of I am. Notice your awareness is self-qualifying, it's self-illuminating. You are, and you know that you are, and you always know that you are. Today, I got to take off work happily. Like I was saying earlier, if you wanted to take me to the middle school, you'd have to have carried this body. But I just passed out. The body was like catatonic the whole day. But yet, and very, like, usually when the body is ill, you have all sorts of strange fever dreams. No dreams whatsoever. And yet I was aware. So when I woke up, it was like 4:50 p.m. It's like, whoa, I'd slept through the whole day. I was like, whoa. And then you reflect upon that. And it was clear to me that I was aware the whole time. Because I was aware that I slept deeply. And that self-awareness, it's there even when you're deeply sleeping. There's never a time when you are and you don't know that you are. So that throb, that pulsation within of I am, that's there even when I'm speaking to you. But then it's there when I'm thinking too, is it not? It's para, and that para inheres in Vaikari, it inheres in Madhyama. So we know all about Vaikari and we know all about Madhyama. We know all about the spoken word and mental word, and so much of our spiritual practice is how we use our spoken word. We chant stotrams, we make affirmations, maybe some of us, like the things that you do on the level of speech. Or like this. This is a kind of spiritual practice too. It's called kata. I'm speaking about God. I'm using my words. Vaikari, that's helpful. But more importantly, because I'm using my words this way, my thoughts will reflect that. So after this lecture, my thoughts will mirror the words that I spoke. So that's why we have to be careful what we talk about. Sri Ramakrishna was very against mundane talk. He felt that we should fill our time speaking only about divine, uplifting things. Because you tend to think about what you talk about, and vice versa. You tend to talk about what you think about. So he would say, if a person eats onions, he will belch onions. In other words, you say what you think about. You immediately know what a person is thinking about the moment they start speaking, because they often talk about what they like and what they love. It's good dating advice too if you like, you're on a date or something and it's raining and then it's like you say, "Oh, it's raining really heavily." And then your date says, "Oh, it must be good for the plants." They're thinking about plants. They're probably an enthusiast. They probably have a garden or something like that. Stuff like that. So what a person says indicates what they're about. Similarly, what you say will affect what you think. So therefore, Madhyama and Vaikari are very related. But pashanti is very mysterious. What exactly do we mean by pashanti? So this is actually a good time actually because Asha is asking here, but aren't you only aware you slept deeply after you wake up and reflect? These are very, very deep questions because it's so subtle. The kind of awareness that is there in deep sleep is so subtle, and that's why it's difficult to talk about. So when we sleep deeply, we are immediately and intuitively aware that we slept deeply. So when we wake up, we don't have to like do any kind of deduction. We don't have to say, oh, last time I was aware it was 8 p.m. and now it's 3 a.m. So therefore, between 8 p.m. and 3 a.m., I deeply slept. We don't have to do that kind of deduction. We don't have to reason our way into the conclusion that I slept deeply. It's intuitively, immediately available to us, the fact that we slept deeply. In fact, we know that we slept deeply because there's such a phrase of deep sleep. We wouldn't in every language of the world have the phrase deep sleep if it wasn't an experience that was available to us in order to be able to articulate it. So the fact that there is the word deep sleep implies that in deep sleep is not an absence of experience, but rather an experience of absence. But it's so subtle because when I'm experiencing absence, it's wholly unlike or categorically unlike anything that I can experience while I'm in a dream or while I'm awake, that it's so hard to say that I was aware there. And yet, I must have been. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to say I slept deeply or dreamlessly, or I wouldn't be able to be so intuitively and immediately aware of the fact that I slept deeply. But the issue is made worse because we um, are only speaking about it while we're awake. That's why it's hard to talk about pashanti or deep sleep, because in deep sleep, there's no chance of speaking to it. And similarly, there's no real way of speaking about pashanti while I'm speaking to you in Vaikari. So now we can only make passing claims about deep sleep. Even in deep sleep, it's hard to like be like, oh, I must be deeply sleeping. You can't do that because the mind is not present there. That's why these issues are very subtle. And they often say logic and language can't really go there. It's better just to have samadhi. The claim that you're aware in deep sleep is arguably only verifiable through samadhi, because samadhi arguably is a lucid deep sleep. In one sense, you can think of samadhi as lucid deep sleep. So yogis often say, like, here's an argument for the benefit of us who have not had samadhi. But they're making that argument from samadhi. That's why these yogis, they look at Advaitins or people as like, you guys are nerds, bookworms, with your logical arguments and your lectures. Just sit and meditate. In other words, the experiences will prove to us things that arguments will just go back and forth. And you can't really argue these points because, and this is a key, you can't really talk about pashanti or argue for it. And you can't really argue for deep sleep because they're beyond the mind. You can talk about dreams, that's still within the realm of the mind. You can talk about thoughts. Thoughts are still in Madhyama. But once you go beyond Madhyama, beyond Vaikari, beyond Madhyama, what is Pashanti? Who can say? It's prior to the mind, actually. So Pashanti is a mystical realm of language, if you will. So therefore, to describe it, usually these masters will lapse into mysticism. That's why once I asked the chat GPT what it thought about Advaita Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism just for fun. And it gave me a very interesting response. She said that Kashmir Shaivism is like a mystical, artistic, and playful version of Advaita Vedanta. Whereas Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism tend to be a bit more logical, Kashmir Shaivism or Kaulatrika, it doesn't mind becoming mystical or lapsing into mystical language or poetic language or allegorical language like that. It has more of the religious, devotional elements intact. So that being said, when we talk about Pashanti, we're talking about something like Bija mantras. We're talking about like sounds that don't have a linguistic meaning, that don't really come with a thought construct, really. And that's why bijas are so important. When you receive a mantra in Diksha, usually it has four parts. One part is usually not always, but usually Om. And Om represents Para, the supreme reality. After all, Om is the resonance of that supreme reality. If you want to get this view, you don't have to go to the Tantras. You can go to the Upanishads. Mandukya Upanishad itself says, Sarvam Omkara Eva. Everything is verily Om. Om is a sound, by the way. It's Nada, Shabda Brahman, if you will. So Om, that sound inheres in the ultimate nature of reality. That's Parā-Vāc. So Om is there, and usually in the mantra Om is there. That's Para. Then there is some bija, which is very secret. It doesn't really mean anything. That's Pashanti. Then there is sometimes a name. So Om, Bija, name. Name is in the mind, Madhyama. And then some kind of act like Namaha, I bow to. So Bija is Pashanti, Nama is Madhyama, and that Namaha or that Swaha or something can be the Vaikari. So you can see even in the mantra, these four levels are implied. In any case, the Bija corresponds to Pashanti. So when we want to work on the Pashanti level, which is a sort of like platonic, archetypical realm beyond the mind, if you will, then you have to work with these mantras that go beyond the mind. So here we talk about things in entirely mystical terms. That's why japa becomes so powerful. Japa, the repetition of a mantra, can be done on the level of speech, vaikari. You can do it aloud, but that's the least effective way to do japa. It's wonderful. It's still really great. But it's better to do japa internally. This is called manasa japa. Manasa japa is when you think the mantra. You repeat the mantra inwardly. And even now we should be doing it. So inwardly the mantra can just go on in an uninterrupted stream of bliss. Then when that is done, then we can access Pashanti. So in a sense, Pashanti is the realm of Ajapa Japa, or it's the realm of a fully integrated mantra. When we've chanted the mantra enough times on the level of the speech, Vaikari, and on the level of the mind, Madhyama, and we just tend to go straight to the mind and chant it inwardly, especially because these mantras are secret. We don't want to say them aloud. Then when we go deep into the Pashanti, we feel the mantra in a way that, again, I can't speak to now because these are experiences that are mystical in nature and therefore not susceptible to Vaikari or Madhyama type speech. But it's speech nonetheless. You'll feel the mantra within flowing like an articulation beyond the mind. Sometimes we can call this ajapa japa, which is in one sense when the mantra just starts chanting itself and you hear it flowing within you. And then thanks to that mantra on the Vaikari, Madhyama, and Pashanti level, one is able to access the Para, the supreme spanda, the vibration of I amness, which is at the heart of reality. And then we go beyond this limited notion of body, mind, personality, and we feel ourselves to be embodied as the totality, as all things, in all times, in all places, all at once. That's the ultimate state of realization. So in the Advaita Vedanta view, it's Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which means you're just Brahman. Here, what it means to be Brahman is to feel your fullness. So here it's called Purna Hankta. So your fullness, and you could say in some view it's an emptiness only model where you feel yourself to be empty, or you can't speak to these things. Yeah, it's Brahman minus the world, exactly. The world is seen as illusory. It's sublated in this state. Shakti is gone. In Advaita Vedanta, Shakti is synonymous with Maya. Once Maya is gone, Shakti is gone. You're just now in Brahman. Shiva only, Prakasha only. But in this view, it's Prakasha with Vimarsha. But now we come to an even deeper point. Final point I'll make, and then we'll talk about just a few things about momentum and whatnot, and then we'll open for Q&A. Final point, though, is that Vimarshana, like we were saying, is a kind of Parā-Vāc. It's a divine speech, and it's always present at the absolute level of reality, Paramartha Sat. But importantly, this divine speech also is the articulation called the world. So the entire world, which is what can be seen and what cannot be seen, what can be known and what cannot be known. By world is meant the vastest possible use of the word. Right? It's not just the physical world, it's all the bhuvanas, 118 bhuvanas within the 36 tattvas, within the 5 kalas, right? Nivritti, Pratishta, Vidya, Shanta, Shantatita. All of that is really language. So what we learn in the Shad Advan system is that like this world, this entire diverse creation is really mantra. It's really pada. It's really varna. This whole thing is language. Because language, remember, is an act of consciousness, but it's a revelatory act of consciousness. So the way Lord Shiva reveals himself to himself is arguably through the world. So when you look at the world, it's Shiva reflecting on himself. And importantly, your very being is Shiva's self-reflection. So as the world appears, that too is Vimarshana. Yeah, so having said that, the world is synonymous with, in Shankara's view, Maya. Maya is the source of the snake. After all, the rope did not create the snake, Maya did. The word Maya here means mityatva, falsity. It means superimposition, adhyasa, seeing a snake where there is only a rope. Whereas, as we learn in the non-dual tantric view, it's not Maya as illusion, but Maya as power, Maya as Shakti. So we learn paramam yat swatantriyam. the supreme freedom of the Lord. Paramam yat swatantriyam durgata sampadhanam maheshasya. The power of Lord Shiva, the supreme freedom of Lord Shiva to do the inconceivable. Durgata sampadhanam maheshasya. Devi Maya Shakti Swatmavaranam Shivasya tat. Maya is now a goddess and she is a power. She is the power of Lord Shiva's unbounded freedom to do the inconceivable, to hide himself from himself. In a game of hide and seek, if you will. So Maya is no longer the individual superimposing onto the real rope a false snake. Now Maya is the inherent power of Brahman to project the world and thereby cover himself up or hide himself from himself through the projection of that world. So then now we get the idea of Leela or Krida, that all of this is a divine sport, a divine game, theater, if you will, and Lord Shiva inconceivably wants to play in this way. You might say like, oh my God, it's play for him, it's death for me, as Swami Turiyanandaji pointed out. But it's like, who are you? It is your play. This whole thing is for fun, and it's your fun actually that you're having. Hard to appreciate that point when you're like sick in bed, like, dude, like shivering. You're like, what kind of game is this? But it's a rasa, it's a wonderful flavor. It's one of the many flavors of consciousness that can be appreciated, savored, and enjoyed. So having said that, the world is real in this view. Real in the sense that it's shining non-differently in the mirror of consciousness. It's real as the self-reflection of Lord Shiva. So in terms of the absolute nature of reality and its experience, in Advaita Vedanta or in some forms of Buddhism, the experience is a void-only experience. So the world is gone. It's baddha, sublated. Here, the world is maintained. And so the ultimate level of experience in terms of samadhi would be to feel yourself as the one consciousness which inheres as the entire world. So bharita, the word bharita is cognate with bhairava. What it means to be bhairava is to be the whole world. So it's a different kind of samadhi, if you will. The nirvikalpa samadhi of Advaita Vedanta is accepted, but it's kind of hierarchically seen as lower because it's the acceptance of prakasha without vimarsha. And if you accept prakasha without vimarsha, you won't get fullness. But if you get prakasha and vimarsha, in other words, if you go beyond vijnana kala, if you can get into that level of mantra maheshwara, like that, if you can get to that level of spiritual realization, then you have a slightly fuller, more capacious realization, speaking hierarchically. However, as you know, I don't like to speak hierarchically, although sometimes the tradition will. I think it's better to say that these are all valid realizations of God. In one realization, the world is gone. It's just pure nirvikalpa samadhi. Void devours void. No sun, no moon. According to another view, the world is really a reflection in the mirror of consciousness. And when you attain the ultimate silence, you attain the ultimate speech, the speech of I am, the pure articulation of self-awareness. And this entire world is that, actually. And so you feel yourself to be embodied as the whole world. Okay, maybe we should leave it at that. So how's that? I hope that's nice. And you can see that when Bagalā silences you, there will never be total silence. Because that silence is the silencing of this mind and the silencing of this speech. But that doesn't mean all speech is silenced, because even at the ultimate nature of reality, there's Parā-Vāc. So what do we call this lecture? I mean, I've been kind of, as you know, I tend to make it up as we go along. But today especially, okay, where are we going to talk about? But I think it's a profound question. Is there such a thing as silence? What's the ultimate nature of reality? But I don't know. It's like, I have to think about what to call this topic. So now let's say one more thing about practice, the kind of takeaway from all of this, and we'll open some Q&A. Here's the takeaway. Mantra is awesome, and it's helpful on every level of spiritual life, because ultimately at the highest level of reality, there's still a mantra, and that mantra is aham, I am. Is the first syllable of matrika, ha is the last one. So contains within it, and ha contain within it literally every sound you can make with your throat. So it's like e, u, all the sounds, a, I, o, ow, and you can add the semi-vowels to ra, la, like that. And everything together, ka, ga, ka, all the sounds, they're between and ha. And so when you put and ha together, you've got the whole language, meaning the whole universe in a nutshell. And what is aham? It could be aha, like spontaneous joy of discovery, aha, chamatkara. But it could also be aham, I am. You put the bindu there, I am. So the ultimate mantra is I am, and that mantra will never go away. That's why in the Vijnana Bhairava, verse 24, we get this idea of visarga para ucharet. It is the divine articulation. Visarga is the divine articulation of the goddess Para. And it is this breath. The breath itself contains within it the Hamsa or Soham mantra. So one sense of Ajapa Japa is that Vijnana Bhairava verse 24, as Swami Bhajanandaji himself was saying yesterday. Like when you just breathe, if you pay attention to the breath, you'll see in the breath is already encoded a mantra on the para level actually. And that mantra is I am. So Ajapa Japa happens arguably at Pashanti, it happens at Para. It's always there in Para. I am. So as long as you affirm your I amness, that itself is the most profound spiritual practice. I am, I am, I am. Each breath is saying that. I am, I am, I am. But now let's talk about the mantra that you get at Diksha. So when the Guru gives a mantra, or maybe you chose one on the internet, which is perfectly fine. But through Diksha or out of your own choice, say you have a mantra, it's one of the single most important tools we could have in spiritual life. And you can see in this philosophy, because it's a philosophy premised on speech, the speech act is of prime importance. So when you want to keep up spiritual momentum, the mantra is so important because the more you chant it, the sweeter it becomes. And it's kind of simple. You just chant it as much as you can all the time. Anytime you can remember to chant it. So you can have a mala, a rosary, you can chant it on your fingers, and it's always good to count. And the reason for counting is so that you can um, set new goals and all of that stuff. Like all the things that we already do in the world, like trying to increase all the numbers that we have in the world, we can try the same thing in spiritual life. We can apply all that rajas in spiritual life. And so we count, we try to do 10 malas, 15 malas, 30 malas a day, like that. And we try to increase the number of malas that we're doing. And so that can really create some momentum in spiritual life when we have these goals. So the first thing that's helpful in spiritual life, like in every other form of life, is to have goals. And in spiritual life, a good goal is just to chant your mantra more. You can't really control for quality in the beginning because you could sit there and try your best to chant the mantra to the best of your ability, but sometimes the mind does not cooperate. Quality is very hard to control for, but quantity you can control. And in a sense, quantity begets quality. So if you just chant your mantra more and more and more, each repetition will become more and more meaningful. So one way to keep inspired in spiritual life is to set like manageable, decent, meaningful goals for yourself to be able to chant malas more and more and more as you go. That's one thing. Today is a very auspicious day. It's Sita Jayanti. So yesterday was Bagalāmukhī Jayanti. Today is Sita Jayanti. Coming up is going to be Chinnamasta Jayanti. So this is another way to keep up the momentum in spiritual life. It's called Vrata, observing these holy days. So we've got Rabindranath Tagore Jayanti. We've got Lakshmanju Jayanti, Anandamayama Jayanti. Oh, and there's Buddha Jayanti coming up on the full moon. So it's going to be thrice blessed day. So all of these things ought to be observed. So when the day comes, you can become excited about something. It's, oh my God, today is Sita's birthday. I can think about Sita. I can read the Ramayana or something like that. There's a fun movie called Sita Sings the Blues. You can watch something like that. Or like just like kind of keep your mind on a new form of God by observing these various festivals. So you can just type in the drikpanchang.com or something and you can just look at what's happening. Get the Kali Mandir's calendar. That's my favorite way to keep up with. Yeah, it's a beautiful film. Keep up with all these festivals. And so that's another way to stay inspired in spiritual life, just to observe the various festivals that happen from time to time. So today is Sita Jayanti. We can celebrate. We can be like, oh, it's a holy day. Sita Jayanti. Yes. Hello, Lekama, Jaima. Sita Jayanti. Then we could say, let's do puja. When we commit to doing daily ritual practice, it creates a kind of festivity in the day. Haven't you noticed? It's like puja is so celebratory, and you have to go and collect the flowers, and there's a lot to do, so it occupies you, and then you sit down, you do the worship, and you get this very rewarding feeling when you finish a good puja. It's a very nice feeling of like, I've worshipped God. It feels wonderful. So there's puja, and I think one of the most powerful things is arati, just having your own daily arati practice. Every evening when the sun begins to set, just wave some lights and celebrate God. You can bang a drum, you can sing songs. We've talked about it. Sorry, we've talked about it in other places. But a simple arati practice that you can do at home, that kind of thing is so helpful to keep up the bhava, to keep up a feeling of like spiritual joy in life. So the whole thing about spirituality, those of you who are at Atlanta, you saw, it's about joy. There's so much festivity. There's so much fun, it's like everything is just so lively and festive. And that only feels true when we're at a festival or at a retreat. But these are all various methods to keep up that festivity and that enlivenment by yourself. It doesn't have to be by yourself. One more suggestion is try to get people together. Get people together to sing kirtan or to do puja or to take prasad or to discuss God. What we're doing now is very important. Just coming together in satsang is a very important way to keep up spiritual momentum. We can do that online, but you can also get together in your local community and like do pujas and sing and take prasad. Jaima, jaima, jaima. So all of these various things, they keep up the momentum in spiritual life. But notice, all of these are like kinds of speech. When you're singing or when you're doing puja, you're using mantra. So that's why the most important thing arguably in spiritual life as part of this tradition is mantra, which is always there for you, no matter how sick the body is. So say the body is ill, you could just like lie down and like pass out on the couch, and you'd still have your mala with you. You'd still have your mantra spinning within. That's all you need. Wherever you are, you don't need an altar or a murti. You don't even really need a mala. That's why it's very beneficial to learn how to count on your fingers in the beginning, because that way, you'll always have your fingers with you. So even if you don't have your mala and you're like on the hospital bed ready to kick the bucket or something like that, well, ideally you'll still have your hands and you can still do your mantra. And as long as you're spinning the mantra within, you're connected to God. You're rooted in reality, if you will. So our guru's guru, Swami Brahmananda used to say, when you get tired of sitting upright and saying mantra, in other words, if you're ill, then you can just lie down. And you can lie down and say the mantra. That was the advice he used to give to people when they would complain that their backs were hurting or they would say that they were ill. And so that's an important thing to remember, that the mantra is so accessible. It's almost easy. It's not, obviously. Spiritual life, it's always a struggle because it's a pattern that you're struggling to get the mind to fill. But it's grace. It's God's grace that all we need to do in this Kali Yuga, arguably, is take God's name and repeat it incessantly. So the only real practice that we prescribe in this tradition is japa. Like everything else supplements japa, like puja, hatha yoga, all the other things are there to make it so that you can just repeat the mantra. Sarada Devi used to chant 100,000 repetitions of her mantra every single day. Like you did so much japa, and people would ask her, they would say like, how are you able to do that? Because you have so many chores and everything. And she would say, I would put the water to boil. I would do japa while waiting for the water to boil, stuff like that. So, and we heard this yesterday also. But like all throughout the day, japa can be there for you. You can just repeat the mantra again and again. It's a really remarkable, powerful thing. So let's close there. Mā Bagalā silences us, but her mantra is nonetheless a mantra. And we were asking Amruta Devi and Chakreshwara last week how it felt to worship Mā Bagalā. And everyone reported that there is a deep stillness, a sthira maya, a kind of settledness that comes when you chant her mantra, as if the magic of Maya is dispelled and you abide in stillness. But hopefully at the end of this lecture, you can see that even in that stillness, there's a spanda, a pulsation, a throb of I am. So the mantra really means that. The repetition of the mantra, the silence in between each successive repetition of the mantra, again and again, it's nothing but consciousness reaffirming itself to itself, revealing itself to itself. It's the Divine Mother appreciating her own beauty, if you will, in the mirror of herself. So let's take up the mantra, and just anytime we have dryness in spiritual life, chant that mantra more. You'll see, as the mantra gets chanted more and more and more, it becomes a panacea, an antidote to all spiritual dryness. The name itself is an invigorating, powerful entity, because the name is non-different from the deity which it signifies. So once you get God's name, you pretty much have God. And the best thing is, you can have God in bed while you're lying there, racked with fever, because you can say the name. You can just lie down and chant. So I just wanted to offer that as a final piece for those of you who've been asking about how to practice during sickness. Another thing also to remember is that it's important not to let our spiritual ego kind of get in the way of rest, because that, like speaking from experience, it's a very anecdotal thing for me. You can feel like, okay, I need to do this many repetitions of the mantra, or I need to do this kind of puja, a long puja or something like that. And then we get ill and the body is not compliant. It's very easy to push ourselves and to do things that maybe perpetuate that illness more than it needs to. Like it's sometimes important that we scale back the puja, that we take time to rest. And that doesn't mean you don't do spiritual practices. It just means those spiritual practices might change in form. So instead of sitting upright and saying your mantra with the mala like this in a very focused way, you could just lie down and in a more devotional way, just repeat the mantra. Not focusing on the yogic concentration elements, but just focusing on a simple bhakti practice of repeating the name. It could be making your puja much shorter, if doing it at all, just offering a few flowers and offering a bit of food, like that. So scaling back the puja, obviously avoiding any kind of hatha yoga or strenuous activity like that, allowing the body time to rest. But as the body is resting, we can simply use that moment of tenderness and like almost like feebleness, if you will, to become better devotees. I was telling G and G yesterday, it's like there's a special kind of sadhana that we can do. I call it complaining sadhana. So even if all you do all day long is whine and bitch and moan and whinge at Ma, that's still prayer. And you'll see in a lot of Shyama Sangeet, that's the kind of bhava that many of these great devotees of Ma have. It's kind of complaining bhava. Mother, what kind of mother are you? You've left me here for dead in this world. Like that, this feeling of just being mad at God or complaining at God or moaning and asking help from God. These are all powerful forms of sadhana also, because everything directed towards God will be spiritually nourishing. So when we're ill, and in any case of any kind of suffering, physical or psychological or even spiritual, all the forms of suffering are all spiritually nourishing because they help us turn our mind towards God. So with that said, after retreats, after Navaratri, after Shivaratri, we can still keep up the festivity in our spiritual life through things like Arati, Puja, getting together, especially through bhakti practices like singing, kirtana, like that. Even while we're sick, there's japa. So the takeaway from this lecture, finally, the TLDR, is that speech is essential to reality. Therefore, it is essential in spiritual practice. Mantra is the heart of our spiritual practice. And japa, the repetition of the mantra, is that spiritual practice by which the very highest can be attained. So to close with Holy Mother Sarada Devi, who is Bagalā herself, she once said, Japat Siddhihi. From japa comes the highest spiritual perfection. So I pray to Holy Mother, who is Bagalā, that we may all take refuge in japa and that we may chant our mantra unceasingly so that it may flow like an uninterrupted river of bliss within. May this be an offering of yellow flowers and turmeric at the lotus feet of Bagalāmukhī. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Shri Sarada Rupini Bagalarpanam Astu. Jai Ma.